I came home from 3 weeks in Calgary to find my front door unlocked, the porch light off, and my wife's car sitting in the driveway with frost on the windshield like it hadn't moved in days. That was the first sign something was wrong. My wife never leaves the porch light off. I called her name when I stepped inside. Nothing. The house had that particular silence that isn't peaceful, the kind that sits heavy, like a held breath. I set my bag down by the door and walked through to the kitchen. Her reading glasses were on the counter next to a cold cup of tea. A plate with half a piece of toast dried out and curled at the edges. My chest tightened. I called again, louder, went down the hall, checked the bedroom. Empty. The bathroom. Empty. And then, just as I was pulling out my phone to dial her number, I heard it. A faint sound coming from the direction of the garage. A sound that stopped me cold. It wasn't banging, it wasn't screaming, it was a voice, low and exhausted, almost like a person talking to themselves because talking to themselves was the only thing left to do. I crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and put my ear to the door that connects to the garage. Her voice. My wife's voice. Weak and hoarse. I threw open the door. She was sitting on the cold concrete floor, her back against the old chest freezer, knees pulled up to her chest. She was wearing the same cardigan she'd had on when I left 3 weeks ago. Her lips were dry and cracked. Her eyes, when she looked up at me, were glassy and red-rimmed. She said my name just once and started to cry. I got down on my knees on that cold garage floor and held her, and all I could do was say, "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." Like those 2 words could fix what had happened. They couldn't. But at that moment, I didn't know yet what I was dealing with. I just knew I needed to call an ambulance. What I found out, over the following days and weeks and months, changed my understanding of what family means, what love costs, and how far a person can fall when they convince themselves the end justifies the means. My wife and I have been married for 34 years. We met in Guelph when we were both in our late 20s. She was a school librarian. I worked in insurance, which isn't a glamorous story, but it gave us a good life, a house in Barrie, 2 vehicles, a small cottage up near Parry Sound that we'd owned since our youngest was a child. We weren't wealthy by anyone's definition, but we were comfortable. We'd worked for everything we had. We have 2 children. Our daughter is 40 now, lives in Kelowna with her husband and our grandchildren. She calls every Sunday. She is steady and warm, and I am grateful for her every single day. And then there is our son. He is 36. His name is Adrian, though I notice now how strange it feels to write that, to name him, like he is a character in a story rather than a person I held in my arms in a delivery room 36 years ago. He was a good kid, quiet, thoughtful. He played hockey until his knee went in his teens. He studied business administration at Laurentian, which cost us close to $60,000 in tuition and living expenses, though we never once made him feel that was a burden. It wasn't. We wanted to give him a start. He graduated, got a job in sales for a software company in Toronto, did all right for himself. Then he met Renata. I want to be fair about Renata, because I know how these things can sound. I know it's easy to make a villain out of a daughter-in-law when things go badly. So let me say this. When I first met her, I thought she was sharp, funny, confident. She was from Hamilton, had a big personality, laughed loudly at dinner. I liked her. My wife liked her. We were pleased when Adrian brought her home for Christmas the second year they were together. The first time I noticed something off was about 8 months after their wedding. Adrian called me on a Thursday evening. Not unusual, we spoke most weeks, but there was something different in his voice. He wanted to know if my wife and I would be interested in a financial opportunity. He said he'd been doing a lot of research, that he and Renata had found something genuinely life-changing. He used that phrase 3 times in the same conversation. I asked him what it was. He told me it was a wellness company. They sold supplements, skincare products, essential oils. The real opportunity, he explained, was in building a team, recruiting other people to sell, earning a percentage of their sales. I knew what he was describing before he finished the sentence. I'd been in insurance for 30 years. I'd seen people lose their savings to these schemes. I told him, calmly and directly, that what he was describing was a multi-level marketing company, and that the vast majority of people who join them lose money. He got quiet. Then I said Renata had already made $1,200 in her first month. I said that was good, and I hoped it continued, but my wife and I weren't interested. He didn't push. We hung up. I assumed that was the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next year and a half, the subject came up again and again, each time framed slightly differently. First, it was an invitation to an information session at a hotel conference room in Newmarket. Then it was a request for us to buy some of the products to support the team. Then it was a direct ask. Would we loan them $15,000 to help them expand their downline? I said no. My wife said no. We tried to stay gentle about it because Adrian's mood seemed increasingly fragile every time we raised concerns. He'd become defensive in a way he never had before. Conversations that used to feel easy started feeling like negotiations. Renata, for her part, stopped coming to family dinners. Looking back, I understand now that this was deliberate. When Renata was absent, Adrian was more malleable. Without her there, he would sometimes lower his guard, talk to us the way he used to, but by the following morning or by the next phone call, something would have shifted. He'd be back to the script. My wife started keeping a journal. I didn't know this at the time. I found out later when the police asked for documentation, and she handed them 140 pages she'd filled over 18 months. She had dates, conversations, amounts. She'd written down every request they'd made, every comment Renata had made about the older generation not understanding how wealth building works. Every time Adrian had hinted that our cottage should really be considered family equity that could be leveraged. The cottage. That was where things started to move from frustrating to frightening. The cottage had been in my wife's family before it came to us. Her parents had bought it in 1971 and passed it to her when her father died. It wasn't just a piece of property. It was the place where our kids had learned to swim, where my daughter had her 20th birthday, where my wife and I had gone every August for the better part of 3 decades. It was not for sale. It was not an investment vehicle. It was not family equity. Renata began referring to it as though it were already partially theirs, small things at first, comments about what they'd eventually do with the place. A suggestion that Adrian's name should be added to the title, since he was the son and therefore the natural heir. When my wife gently corrected her, the cottage would be distributed equally between both children in our estate. Renata's expression went somewhere cold and stayed there. The formal ask came last September. Adrian came alone, which I now realize was calculated. He sat at our kitchen table and explained that he and Renata were in debt. He didn't say how much at first, and that they needed help. Serious help. He said they'd gotten over-leveraged building the business and had some short-term cash flow challenges. I asked him how much. He said $80,000. My wife made a sound that wasn't a word. I told him we didn't have $80,000 liquid, which was the truth. We have our house, our RRSP accounts, the cottage, and enough in our checkwing to cover our expenses. We are not sitting on a pile of accessible cash. I told him that. He said we could refinance the cottage. I said no. He said Renata's mother had already put in $30,000 and that her parents were doing their part. I said I was sorry to hear that and I meant it, but the answer was still no. He left angry. Not yelling. He was never a yeller, but with that particular stillness that is sometimes worse than yelling. He didn't say goodbye to my wife when he left, just picked up his jacket and walked out. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Calgary. I'd been asked to consult on a file for a former colleague. He runs a small insurance brokerage and needed someone with my background to review a complex claim situation. I'd done similar work before. It was supposed to be 3 weeks, maybe a bit more if they needed me. My wife had encouraged me to go. She said it would be fine. She said she'd use the time to sort out the garden before the freeze. I called her every day. The first week, she answered every time. She sounded like herself. Second week, I missed her twice but reached her on the 3rd attempt. She sounded tired. I asked if she was okay. She said she was fine, just not sleeping well. I should have gotten on a plane that day. I know that now. I've said it to myself so many times since that it stopped feeling like regret and started feeling like something carved into me. 3rd week, she stopped answering. I left voicemails. I sent texts. I called my daughter in Kelowna, who tried calling from her number. No answer. I told myself there were explanations. Her phone battery. She sometimes forgets to charge it. She goes to her book club on Thursdays and leaves her phone in the car. I told myself these things because the alternative felt too large to look at directly. On the Thursday of my 3rd week, I booked an early flight home. I landed in Toronto on a Friday morning, drove the hour and 20 minutes to Barrie, and pulled into the driveway at just before noon. The porch light was off. Her car had frost on the windshield. When the paramedics arrived, they assessed my wife as severely dehydrated and hypothermic. She'd been in that garage for 4 days. She had no access to water except a small plastic jug she'd managed to find on a shelf and fill from a pipe that dripped condensation in one corner. She had no phone. She had no way to signal anyone. The neighbors on our left were away that week, and the ones on the right work days and apparently hadn't thought to check. She told me, in the hospital that first night, what had happened. Adrian and Renata had arrived the week before, 2 days after I left for the airport. They'd told her they needed to sort out some paperwork regarding the cottage. My wife had said again that there was nothing to sort out. Renata had said there was. It escalated. My wife told them to leave. Renata said they weren't leaving until they had what they needed. At some point, and my wife is still uncertain about the sequence because it happened so fast. She was in the garage. She'd gone to get her boots from the rack near the side door. And the door clicked behind her. She said she heard Renata say on the other side, "Think about it. Our garage door is automatic with a keypad entry. My wife knows the code. We both do. Our daughter does. But the interior control panel had been covered with electrical tape, and the manual emergency release cord, the red cord that hangs from the trolley, had been removed. I checked when I got home after the ambulance left. Cut clean, not pulled loose. Cut with something. She spent 4 days in that garage. She rationed the condensation water. She used an empty paint bucket when she needed to use the bathroom. She yelled until her voice gave out, and then she stopped yelling because she couldn't anymore. She is 71 years old. I sat beside her hospital bed that Friday night, and I held her hand and I listened to her tell me all of this, and I didn't say much. My wife has often told me over the years that she married me partly because I go quiet when I should go quiet, that I don't perform anger. I just decide. I had decided, somewhere on the drive from the airport to the hospital, that I would not yell. I would not show up at Adrian's door and say things I couldn't take back. I would not make the mistake that so many people make in situations like this, which is to let their emotion outpace their strategy. I called my daughter from the hospital parking lot, and I told her what had happened. She cried. I told her not to book a flight yet. I told her I needed 2 weeks to do things in the right order. The next morning, I called a family lawyer in Barrie that my insurance contacts had recommended for estate matters. Her name was Ms. Okafor, and she was exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when things have gone badly. Methodical, unimpressed by drama, focused on what could be documented and proven. I laid out everything: the journal, the asks for money, the cottage pressure, what happened to my wife. She listened without interrupting, asked clarifying questions, and then told me what she thought we were dealing with. Criminal. What Renata and my son had done by confining my wife against her will was unlawful confinement under the Criminal Code of Canada. That's a straight indictable offense. She said I should also speak to the police about aggravated assault, given the physical harm caused by the conditions. She said she'd refer me to a criminal lawyer colleague. Civil. We could pursue damages in civil court for the physical and psychological harm, the cost of hospital treatment, and potentially the financial pressure campaign they'd run over the previous 18 months if we could document it. My wife's journal was significant evidence. Estate. She recommended we update our wills and the cottage ownership documentation immediately, before any legal proceedings gave them an opportunity to make claims. I left her office and called the police. The officer who came to take my statement was young, couldn't have been more than 28, and she took notes without blinking. I walked her through the timeline. She asked questions I hadn't anticipated, which I took as a good sign. She said they would follow up. Adrian and Renata were arrested at their apartment in Barrie 11 days later. I know this because my daughter called me when she saw it. Adrian had apparently posted something on social media about family trying to destroy us, and one of his cousins had sent the post to my daughter, who sent it to me. I didn't engage with it publicly. I saved a screenshot. The criminal proceedings took 7 months. I won't walk through every hearing because this is not a legal document and I'm an old man who finds courtrooms exhausting. What I will say is this: Renata took a plea. Unlawful confinement, conditional sentence, 2 years probation, restitution toward my wife's hospital and ongoing medical bills. Her lawyer argued she hadn't anticipated the physical consequences. that she'd only intended a short confinement to create pressure. The judge was not warm to that framing, but the plea saved time and the Crown accepted it. Adrian pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, criminal harassment, stemming from the months of financial pressure campaign. His lawyer argued he'd been under the influence of his spouse. There was some truth to that, I think. It didn't excuse what he allowed to happen. He received a conditional discharge and 2 years probation and was ordered to complete a financial counseling program. My wife sat in that courtroom for the sentencing and said nothing to either of them. I had written a victim impact statement. I read it aloud. I said that my wife had been imprisoned in her own home by our son and his wife, that she had survived on condensation water for 4 days, that she was still in physiotherapy for the muscle deterioration she'd experienced, that she woke some nights calling out, and neither of us could explain why until we realized she'd been crying in her sleep for weeks. I said I was not angry in the way people expected me to be angry. I was something quieter than that, and more permanent. The civil suit was filed simultaneously. Miss Okafor had connected me with a litigation colleague, and between the two of them they built a case that settled out of court 8 months after the criminal proceedings concluded. I won't state the amount here, but it was sufficient to cover all of my wife's medical expenses, the cost of the legal proceedings on our side, and additional compensation for pain and suffering. The cottage remains entirely in our names, and my wife's estate planning now reflects the changes we discussed with Miss Okafor. Our daughter receives the cottage outright. Our son receives nothing. He has been told this. He knows. I updated my own will the same week. There's one more thing I want to say, because I've thought about it more than anything else these past 2 years. People have asked me whether I regret cutting off my son entirely, whether there was a moment where I considered forgiveness, reconciliation, some kind of mediated conversation where we found our way back to each other. I understand why they ask. He is my son. I held him in the delivery room. I taught him to drive a Standard in an empty parking lot off Essa Road in the autumn when he was 16. I have 36 years of memories that don't simply stop because of what he chose to do. But here is what I know. He stood outside that door for 4 days. He knew his mother was inside. He could have opened it at any point. He didn't. Whatever pressure Renata put on him, whatever story he told himself about strategy or leverage or negotiation he chose, every morning for 4 days, to leave her there, that was not a mistake. A mistake is reversing out of a driveway without checking your mirrors. What he did was a series of choices made repeatedly over multiple days, with full knowledge of what those choices meant. I am 64 years old. My wife is 71. We don't have unlimited time. What time we have decided, will be spent carefully. Last August, we opened the cottage for the first time since everything happened. My daughter came from Kelowna with her husband and the grandchildren. We took the kids out on the water in the old aluminum boat that my wife's father bought in 1978. We ate corn on the cob on the dock. The youngest grandchild fell asleep in my wife's lap before it got dark, and my wife sat there for an hour, not wanting to move, just holding her. She looked over at me once, across the dock, and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Some things you rebuild quietly, piece by piece, without making speeches about it. You just start, and you keep going. And one evening you look up and realize the weight has shifted, and the thing that was broken is becoming something else. Not what it was, exactly, but livable, solid. That's what we're doing.